Working, but the question is amid what context? Does the US, does the UK actually have a political strategy to devalue the Houthis in Yemen? I think the answer is no. And in that case, what you can best hope for with these strikes working is to degrade the Houthi long-range strike capabilities, make sure they have less and less and less supply. But another challenge in the face of this is Iran's intent to continue to proliferate different kinds of systems, anti-ship cruise missiles, engines, as we've seen intercepted recently by CENTCOM for medium-range ballistic missiles. So Iran is intent on supplying this proxy. The proxy is intent on continuing to use these weapons. The question is, how long will the US and UK continue to degrade or defang the Houthis in Yemen?
Well, the Prime Minister in this country has put us on notice that this will go on for months. The way to short-circuit that, of course, is to try and de-escalate the conflict. What do you see in the American approach to this mediation that's ongoing at the moment?
I'm not exactly buying that the Houthis, well over 1,000 kilometers away in Yemen, are intent on being the mediators or moderators between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And what I mean by that is we have to take into account a bit more context, forgive the pun the second time. Here, the Houthis have now the capability brought to by Iran to make good on a statement they made in 2018, that they would intervene directly between any war between the Israelis and the Palestinians and the Israelis and Hezbollah. So here, in this case, they have an opportunity to flex muscles, and particularly during a period of a ceasefire between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, which we saw in mid-2022, the Houthis have acquired more weaponry during the lull in fighting and are now firing at a different target. So this gives them a status boon to better control the territory at home. I don't think that they're quite interested in peace or conflict mediation or the return of hostages. This is an element, the newest element of Iran's regional terrorist apparatus that they call the Axis of Resistance. It's actually the most well-armed. It's the only one with medium-range ballistic missiles, the first to use land attack cruise missiles, and it has suicide drones and anti-ship cruise missiles, as well as a much broader arsenal, and it's intent on using it. So you have an actor with great capability and great resolve. The question is for us, do we have the capability and the resolve to stop them? The capability, certainly. The resolve is a political question.
Can we set this amid what we're talking about tonight, and that is the start, most probably, of a general election campaign? Do you think the United States is being dragged into another war? And does a ceasefire in Gaza diminish the threat to US forces in the region?
So let's start with the first question, because there is actually an evolution happening in the Republican Party as we speak. Normally, stereotypically, folks across the pond here in the UK may think that the Republicans want to be the hawks or flex their foreign policy muscles or might be the first to use a military solution. That is actually changing. There's a grassroots, kind of co-opting or evolution of the Republican voter. And what we're seeing now is, they're echoing largely but not exclusively more isolationist kind of views that may be in line with what Donald Trump was talking about when he campaigned in 2016 when he said America first. You've seen the president, former President Trump, I should say, withstand domestic political pressure for a conflict with the Islamic Republic of Iran, actually stand down from directly responding to them. So it's a little bit more of a mixed bag to say that Republicans on a knee-jerk would want to escalate directly against the Houthis or would have a very different approach to the Houthi Red Sea shipping threat than the Biden administration. The fact is tonight, as the New Hampshire primary is going on, Trump's challenger, someone who could even get within single digits of Trump, Nikki Haley, represents that older view establishment, that classical image of the Republican Party, which might be more in favor of using that capability over a longer period of time. So there is a debate within these two different poles of the Republican Party.
That is really interesting. Let's bring in our panel on that. Stay there, would you, for me. Marianne, the conflict in the Middle East, it's clearly shaken up US politics in different ways. There are now younger Americans, Arab Americans and Muslims who are opposed to the White House support for Israel, such that Joe Biden might even lose a state like Michigan because of it. Does the very threat of that and the threat to his alliance, which he's trying to bring back together, mean that at some point he eventually has to demand a ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, I think he wants a ceasefire, and the pressure on Bibi Netanyahu with the parade of American appointees and members of the administration going and meeting with Bibi Netanyahu to do that very thing is unrelenting. So that's point one. Two, he doesn't want the conflict to spread, and that means more than anything. But to your guest point, yes, there's a grassroots movement pro-Palestinian, younger voters certainly pro-Palestinian. But look at the Republicans. This isn't a matter of them, not being hawks or anything anymore. They're doing Donald Trump's bidding. Donald Trump wants this to go on until he returns to the White House and he saves Bibi Netanyahu. He will take Ukraine and return it to Putin. That's what Trump wants. So don't underestimate the influence Donald Trump has on the Republican Party, especially members of Congress, when it comes to not giving aid, not acting in these international conflicts and all of that. They want to wait until they think he's going to be back in the White House a year from now.
Marianne, I know I have to let you go. Thank you for joining our panel this evening. It's good to see you. We'll catch up, no doubt, the other side of tonight's result. Let me bring in the rest of our panel on what we're talking about. Miles Taylor, paradoxically, you suddenly see, after all the relationship that Donald Trump had with Benjamin Netanyahu, you see from polls that I've looked at just in the last couple of weeks that actually Israelis in general are starting to shift towards President Biden. And that newfound love that they have for Joe Biden might just hurt his chances of being re-elected.
Yeah, it's a pretty complicated issue, Christian, and it puts, Joe Biden in an odd position. I think in part you can chalk that up to the fact that in a moment of national consequence, when you're under attack and an ally comes to your aid, you feel affinity for that ally. I compare it to how a lot of Americans felt when our allies in Great Britain came to our side so rapidly after the September 11th attacks. You see that sentiment on the ground in Israel towards the United States. But I think that folks also need to be aware that if we see a second term of Donald Trump, we are going to see a seismic shift in U.S. foreign policy. And I think that recognition is also dawning on folks internationally. Namely, a lot of the so-called America First policies Donald Trump wanted to implement in a first term, he wasn't able to. Things like threatening to pull out of NATO or retracting the United States from core alliances. Those are things that Donald Trump will pursue in a second term. And mark my words, the implications will be vast.
Jennifer Carroll, former naval officer. I mean, you've served. Do you pick up on that issue of that there are two sort of Republican strands to foreign policy? The America First approach, which would mean the United States withdrawing from leadership in the Middle East, and this more traditional view, the way that Nikki Haley sees it. Where do you line up in respect to those two positions?
I think what the American people have is fatigue of war. We had all those years of the Afghan war. We have in our VA, our Veterans Affairs, we're seeing all the amputees and injuries of post-traumatic stress disorder and homelessness that have occurred with our American citizens. And the American people are saying, to what end? And why do we have to give up so much? And we didn't see an end result on what all the wars and the money and the injuries that we've incurred. So that's where the American public is looking at. Should we even be engaged in these wars? That's not even, as far as they're seeing, something that is our interest. But on the other hand, particularly at the Red Sea, when we're seeing that we have naval ships out there that are being attacked, and we have commerce that's coming through the Red Sea that's also being attacked, that's an increase to the commerce as well as safety and security for both those vessels, plus our military men and women that are sitting there waiting to do some intervention, if need be, in the territory. So in some instance, we have to realize that we need to be engaged, but how much do we need to be engaged with regards to the attacks as well as the wars that are going on?
And that is the question, Leanne, that strangely Hamas and Putin will probably be asking. I mean, they have similar strategies right now. They're waiting for the West to lose the will. They probably want to see whether America's foreign policy is eaten up by its own divisive politics, and they'll hope that Trump sticks to his word and withdraws. Is that to America's benefit at the end of the day?
Well, when you ask one faction, the Nikki Haley faction of the Republican Party, that still has a pretty large contingent in the Senate and a smaller contingent in the House of Representatives, that's absolutely a crucial time. That's why Congress is still fighting and trying, at least the Senate anyway, to pass $60 billion of aid to Ukraine, which they haven't been able to muster because the border has been gotten caught up in all of this. But it's also generational, two. You have an older generation of politicians and Americans who are standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel, and even Bibi Netanyahu, even though there's some concern with some of his statements, because not doing so, they say, would just redirect the entire world order, especially when it comes to Putin and Ukraine and also what's happening in the Middle East. And so, when I talk about those Republicans, the Nikki Haley type of Republicans who do believe in American interventionism, it's going to be fascinating to see, because those are the ones who have been last to come to Donald Trump's side to see if they end up endorsing him when and if he does become the nominee.
Yeah, and the longer this goes on, Behnam, the more this comes to the fore of the debate. Do you think, just talking very briefly about the region, do you think they prefer a Biden presidency, or will they be hoping that it's Donald Trump next time?
Well, if we're looking at the head of the snake, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, again, they have created or co-opted all of these different terrorist groups that are firing either at Israel, either at the Americans, or either at innocent civilian shipping across the Red Sea right now. I think that actor, again, treats the left and the right the same. They literally call the great Satan the same thing. But I think they've slowly understood, particularly since the 2015 nuclear deal period, that there is a hesitancy to use even non-military or non-kinetic tools of pressure against the government of the Islamic Republic. And in this sense, when you look at some of the way they've spoofed progressive left messaging on social media apps, you've looked at Microsoft reports, you've even looked at statements by the DNI, reports by the DNI about the nature of Iranian in election meddling designed to drive voters to the other side, designed to drive voters away from a Republican. Obviously, they fear a return and an enforcement of the sanctions the Trump administration had, quite literally called maximum pressure.
Which will be the opposite of what Russia's trying to do.
Indeed.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we're going to talk about misinformation the other side of the break. Ben, I'm lovely to see you. Thank you for coming into the studio. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
BBC News, bringing you different stories from across the UK.
The Little Oaks Nursery in Penrith, a place of friendship and fun. But for many families, accessing childcare is a problem.